Gen Alpha is the largest generation in history, and they need more than content. They need the gospel. Reaching Generation Alpha by Shane Pruitt and Shelley Melia is packed with research and practical guidance to help parents, pastors, and anyone who cares for kids today. You'll learn how to model authentic faith, address hard topics, and mobilize kids to live boldly for Jesus. Get your copy of Reaching Generation Alpha today, wherever books are sold.
The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer. I'm joined today by my co-host, Ashish Varma, and also Beth Allison Barr, who has been on the show before and has authored a number of different books, is pretty involved in the conversations about womanhood and the SBC and various things. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. But welcome back to the show, Beth. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So maybe, Ashish and I we're just sort of on the tails finishing up a series on biblical manhood, but I'm kind of interested, we're in this moment where the SBC has done some interesting things, and you've been talking a lot about that. So I'd just be interested in getting your take as someone who sort of follows that in more of an ancillary fashion. I'm not in the SBC, so I kind of, read the reports, but could you maybe give us just a little bit of a rundown of what happened there?
Yeah. So this has been a conversation that's been building since 2022. And I think it's important to note that this is across the same time frame that the SBC has been involved in the sex abuse scandal. And so this parallels what's going on with their vote against women, exactly parallels the increase of emphasis on the sex abuse scandal that has just erupted and is so huge. It's bigger than what the SBC wants to admit to. So these conversations go side by side. And beginning in 2022 they started introducing the idea of a new constitutional amendment for the SBC. And so the SBC has two governing documents. It has the Baptist Faith and Message, which they changed in 1998 and the year 2000 to say that only men can be pastors, but they didn't differentiate what sort of pastor that would be. And they also made it, because local autonomy of churches is in Baptist DNA. So the idea that, churches, this is what they sort of recommend. And now what they are wanting is a constitutional amendment that says that any church that is in friendly cooperation with the SBC, which means you can't you can't vote in the SBC unless you're in friendly cooperation. You also can't participate in all of their missionary organization, and you can't get the benefits of being a part of a very large, very wealthy denomination, for lack of a better word, although they don't like to be called a denomination. But that technically is what they are. So what they wanted was language that would say that women can't be called pastors for their ministry in church in any level. So not even children's pastors, not even, even ones that are safely complementarian churches that agree to male headship and that God ultimately has put men in charge of women. Even if you agree to that and you only have male senior pastors, but you have female pastors working under them, the SBC is now saying that's not good enough, and that those churches need to not be or should not be considered in friendly cooperation with the SBC. And they have tried since 2022, they were building momentum to try to institute this constitutional amendment. It ultimately failed. In 2024, they did not get enough votes to pass it a second time. And then in 2025, they started talking about it again. And then this time, Mohler, who is not president of the Southern Baptist Convention. He has never gained that, although he's always desired it. But he is president of the flagship Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And he himself introduced what he called the Truth and Unity Amendment, where he said that Southern Baptists have always agreed that women should not be pastors, and that it is time to get unity on this once and for all. And in fact, he ended his introduction of this amendment with, let's get this done. And this time the amendment passed. It skipped a bunch of rules that would have said it would have had to be reviewed this year and not be voted on until next year. And they just voted directly on it. And it passed with an overwhelming majority. It's not in the Constitution yet. It still has to be voted on one more time next year. So there's still a chance it may not pass, but it passed with an overwhelming majority this time. So that's it. You can ask questions if you want clarification. So yeah.
Yeah. What was the change from when it didn't pass last time to when it passed this time with that overwhelming majority? Like, any idea what the...
Well, they have lost churches that support women in ministry. That's one of the changes. Is that after they started introducing this, churches, they kicked out Rick Warren. That was part of this, is Rick Warren's church, which is one of the largest and wealthiest Southern Baptist churches that supports women in ministry. They kicked out his church over this. And so they have lost churches that would support women in ministry. I also think that there has been a conservative revival again within the Southern Baptist Convention. And so the moderate voices that were saying, hey, look, we may not support, we're all complementarians here, but we understand local autonomy of churches. And so churches have the right to choose their own pastors. And so we're not going to, kick them out over, this is essentially not a doctrinal issue for the SBC. And those voices have been less easy to hear. Let's just put it that way. And these more conservative voices. And really, I think Al Mohler is such a powerful entity in the SBC that when he stood up and said, this is what we have to do, this is what SBC believes. Also, Clint Presley, their president over at this time, he's different than Bart Barber, who was the president over those earlier years. And Bart Barber was complementarian, but he did not think this amendment was a good idea.
Gotcha.
And now we have Clint Presley, who thinks this amendment is a good idea. So the leadership has changed in the SBC. That's more conservative.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And that helps.
It does. And I guess my sort of last question is, I've seen some of the social media fodder on this, which I don't know that I can trust. But
that's a good impulse not to trust social media.
Right. I see these, I see these things going on, and you see people arguing, women can teach or women can't teach. You see, Al Mohler saying that women shouldn't even have podcasts and shouldn't be interpreting scripture on podcasts.
Yes.
It feels like this could go in a much darker direction than it's already gone.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering just sort of what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly where this could go. I mean, in some ways, what Al Mohler is doing is he's carrying complementarian theology to its logical conclusion. And that if you argue that God created men in a way that made them to have authority over women, and that authority is non-negotiable, and that there's nothing women can do to sort of overcome any of what they consider to be these innate spiritual weaknesses. Although they don't like it when I put it that way, but that's essentially, they're arguing that hierarchy is built into our bodies.
Yeah.
And so when you carry complementarianism to its logical conclusion, it is that men should have complete authority over women, and that, if you're going to take 1 Timothy 2 at face value and not put it in its historical context and say that it means women should not teach or have authority over men whatsoever, or 1 Corinthians, women be silent. If you take those things, then you're like, women shouldn't be on podcasts. And so, in some ways, at least he is having a consistent hermeneutic. But it does lead to a very dark place. And, this is what I've been arguing for several years now.
It's been strange to me, to watch sort of, when I see people quote the 1 Timothy passage, it always stops before, and they will be saved through childbearing, because nobody knows what to say about that. And then even, appealing to the 1 Corinthians passage, 1 Corinthians 11, I think the consistency needs to suggest that, hey, head coverings, it needs to go more Plymouth Brethren than, wear the head covering. Paul's argument there from the creation story is very strange.
It is.
If you're going to take it as Paul simply reading the creation story and not doing anything else.
Absolutely.
And so I have trouble with the way they reconcile these passages together, just from a biblically and interpretive sort of standpoint, aside from the unfortunate downstream effects that I think it has.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Amy Peeler, who's written a great book on gender and God, and she argues that the 1 Corinthians 11 passage is perhaps the most unclear passage in scripture, across the board. I would say first the childbearing passage, she will be saved through childbearing, is probably a close second on this, but nonetheless, she argued. And so what you have done is you've taken a passage that is the most unclear in scripture, simply because there's only so much you can do for understanding historical context and understanding, what was exactly going on. And so we just don't know exactly what Paul is responding to there, although he seems to be responding to things that are going on in the Roman world, in which he is offering a counter. And so, this is also what Amy Peeler argues in, is it Gender and it's something in God. I'm not remembering titles today, but anyway, it's a very good book. So that when you take those types of verses, just very superficially face value and pull them out and then read all of the rest of scripture through them, then you can come up with this very hard-line position that the Southern Baptist Convention has taken. And I stand as a church historian here that what the lines the Southern Baptist Convention is drawing about women leadership in the church and even leadership in the home, et cetera, is some of the harshest lines in church history. This isn't normative. This is extremist. If you look across the expanse of church history, which has not always treated women well. And what the SBC doing is one of the most extreme forms of instituting male headship and female subjugation. Yeah.
Ashish, hop in if you got anything, man.
Yeah, I have kind of a macro question.
Sure.
There's a lot of threads that I'm trying to make sense of, and maybe you can help us here. At the very least, help me. Hopefully, help others as well. It'd be really easy to say, well, you've got these churches, and I think there's certainly a big element to this that's true, right? That you've got these churches that have left or been kicked out of the SBC, and that has skewed the overall temperature in the room, right, for the SBC.
Yeah.
But I also see people outside of the SBC. The same sort of skewing is going on, where there's not the same convention boundaries. Even to the degree that I've watched a lot of issues being clumped together. My own work in race and coloniality. You can probably imagine the temperature rise, the personal head temperature rise that's caused for people.
Yes.
But I've watched people throw that out with blanket statements And then just sort of move as if it's part of one agenda to, oh, by the way, we also have a women preaching, women pastor problem, women teaching problem that we've got to deal with.
Yep.
And we've also got, and then it seems like it's tied together. So as of today, this is a failed attempt, but at least the attempt to be very specific in limiting citizenship on the national level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And
yes,
an added element for me in this is that some of these people who I know who are part of that skewed temperature rising in certain sectors didn't used to be like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if there is one simple answer, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'll throw another book for you. Author Ryan Berg has been doing work. Yeah. You may have talked to him already on tracing the polarization within churches and the inability to have a middle where people who disagree still can talk to each other. And what we have been seeing is that churches have been complicit in this rhetoric, in demonizing people who disagree with them. And, you can think about this, that like even thinking about women, like, I don't know how many times that people have attempted to disparage me as a mother, disparage me as a Christian, saying that essentially, I'm outside the bounds of Christian orthodoxy. And I'm like, I'm a Baptist Sunday school teacher. It's just really fun. This idea that if you disagree, not only are you disagreeing, but that person is evil. And we just saw this at the recent TPUSA event where they, compared feminism they said the reason witches were burned was because essentially they were feminists who were killing babies and that the church was on the right side, which is, I saw one historian who was like, anytime you find yourself agreeing with the people who are killing witches, it's like, maybe you should step back and be like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? And I think it is this inability to have discourse across the table. And where the SBC plays in this, and this is something that I've been trying to get across, is the pivotal piece. The SBC is the largest Protestant denomination in North America. At its high point, it had more than 16 million members, 450,000 congregations spreading throughout the world. And they also had their own material, their Sunday school material, their publishing industry, which really set the tone for other publishing industries and Christian publishing in the US. So even though like Crossway's not technically not SBC, there's a lot of overlap that you see, and the tone set by the SBC is one that you see carried over into these other Christian publishing houses. And then you also think about the the National Evangelical Association in the US has also been struggling with this more conservative element that is very hard line, that is influenced. A lot of the players with the SBC, they overlap. They also overlap with the religious right. You can think Jerry Falwell at the center of this, and James Dobson, and also Bill Gothard, who's been in the news again because of his poor health. And all of these figures overlap, and they have had the way that they have been training Christians to respond to people who disagree with them is by viewing them through this: if you are not for me, you are against me, and you are my enemy. And I think we are seeing the natural progression of that, oppression leads to oppression. So oppression of people who are of a different color or who are of a different, once you think that some people were created better than other people, then it's real easy just to keep applying that outward. And that's what has led us to white supremacy. So I don't know. That was a macro answer that I can bring down. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to hear. So hopefully, at least for me, it was a good answer. I'm trying to still grab a hold of some of these factors that get us to this moment of what seems like an extreme, right? Because
absolutely.
We can certainly point to the rise, I'll leave it nameless, but the rise of certain key influential figures. But how does that seems like that's already part of the water if the rise of key influential figures can cause this kind of extremism. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Maybe I can give a follow-up to this, because this is like, I've always sort of, my wife and I love like cult documentaries on Netflix. It's like sort of a guilty pleasure. And sometimes I'll watch these cult documentaries and I'm like, who is following this guy? Like, I don't understand it. If I saw this guy on the street, he's not a guy I would go, hey, he really seems like he's got all the answers.
Yeah.
And it feels like, just sort of as ancillary to Ashish's question here, like, I understand who the figures are. I don't understand how they gain purchase.
Let me ask you a serious question. If something triggered a major market drop in the coming months, would your retirement be ready or exposed? With inflation, market volatility, and ongoing global uncertainty, more families are taking a closer look at whether their retirement plan is truly built to hold up. And many are finding that adding a layer of protection makes a lot of sense. Sanctuary Metals is a Christian-owned company that helps families strengthen their retirement savings with physical gold and silver through a gold IRA. During uncertain times, many people look to precious metals as a way to add stability when other assets may be under pressure. If you'd like to explore whether a gold IRA is a good fit for your situation, Sanctuary Metals makes it easy to get started. Text GUIDE to 94878 to receive your free retirement defense guide, or call 888-958-6579 to speak with one of their knowledgeable team members. Again, text GUIDE to 94878 or call 888-958-6579. Let's be honest. Ever read a passage and wonder what it really means in its original context? True Bible study isn't just casual reading. It's about connecting historical background, cross-references, and themes. If you've ever felt like navigating all that is just too difficult, you need to check out Logos. Logos is a game-changing platform that equips you to explore hard questions with absolute confidence, knowing you're drawing from reliable, well-respected academic resources. Whether you're at your desk or on the go, Logos helps you follow that path of discovery naturally. With their new AI tools, you can ask Logos any biblical question and get trusted answers from a biblical library. To help you dive into the layers of meaning in the Word, Logos is offering my listeners an exclusive free 60-day trial. Just go to logos.com/deep. That's LOGOS.com/deep to claim your free 60-day trial. Let's stop guessing and start going deeper together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I think what people need to know is that this is not something that came out of the blue. This is something that has been building in 20th century North American Christianity for a really long time. In some ways, you can trace it all the way back to the early part of the 20th century with the fundamentalist-modernist controversy. But then you can also, and that's where you start seeing this. You have to think, these battles over the Bible, there was a lot of fear in the 19th century when science began producing things like, finding, like realizing that there are times of the earth that seem to pre-exist humanity. And when people first started recognizing that and even finding hominid skeleton, and things, and it caused a lot of fear. And anyway, that we could go way into that, but it caused a lot of fear. And so some of the response to that fear was this, like interpreting the Bible in a hyper literal way, that led you to rejecting science and saying, this is not Christian. If you believe this or anything like this, it is not Christian at all. And that was an extreme view. I always tell people, C.S. Lewis believed in evolution. And that often rocks people's worlds. They're like, what? C.S. Lewis? And I was like, he never saw any sort of disconnect between his Christian faith and science. Never saw any disconnect. This is, that was an extreme view, but it began to build. And again, I think a lot of this, is an education issue. This is what churches, it began to be taught in seminaries, and it began to be taught in churches, and you get decades of this teaching. And then what you end up with are is a new generation that has never been introduced to anything differently. So like women who are a little younger than me, who are in their 40s and 30s, there are many of them who have never actually seen a woman preach from a pulpit in their local congregations. Whereas women my age and older saw women preaching in the pulpit in conservative evangelical churches, because that was more of a normative then. But then when you get women now, like all of these young women going to TPUSA events who have only been trained on this very literal reading of the Bible, being told that anything else is anti-Christian and is dangerous, and they have never seen anything different. And it's like, and so I have a lot of sympathy. I think a lot of compassion, because I don't think this is people who are intentionally being cruel, which was a lot of this has ended up in really cruel actions that don't match with what Christianity is. But that's all they've been trained on. And so how do we help them realize that Christianity is a lot bigger and deeper and different than what they've been exposed to without their very fragile faith shattering? And that's a hard, think about the evangelical movement. Yeah. That's faith shattering, because suddenly those tenets that they were taught were when you're taught that evolution, when you're taught that gender roles, that those are the things that hold up your faith instead of actually Jesus. And those things fall, your faith falls. And so we're seeing that's a response, I think. So this is a problem that's been building for a long time. In the Southern Baptist world, since the 1970s is when you started seeing that attempt to take over. And it has taken this long for Al Mohler to be able to stand up. And he knows he's not telling the truth. But because he lived through this, but he says that Southern Baptists have always believed this about women, and his congregations and the people who are in the SBC now, so many of them have never lived in a world where that was different.
Yeah, so he can say that. Nobody's really going to be. It's almost like there's no eyewitnesses to call him on it.
Right.
He can just say that, and everybody goes, "Well, of course they have," because
absolutely, and we've
never known anything different.
Yeah, they're controlling the seminary curriculum. They're controlling the narratives and then what these pastors are being taught. And it's just a snowball is what has been happening.
So, do you see part of what I see when we looked at the masculinity issue, which I think the masculinity issue in very odd ways sort of mirrors what's going on in the female side of this. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. Because as you get one wrong, you're inevitably going to get the other wrong. It's like hard to get them both, get one right and not the other one right.
Yeah.
And so part of what I saw, at least when we were looking at the masculinity conversation, is this sort of straw-manned, we're going to turn out a generation of weak, limp-wristed men who, have high voices and can't grow beards and, couldn't fight in the military. And it's like you have these sort of pictures of these people, and they're framed in this way that is so disingenuous and demeaning.
Yes.
That if you're not careful, you just sit back and go, well, of course I don't want to be like that guy.
Yep.
And on the other side, you sort of play on this. It's Jesus and John Wayne, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. You look back to Rambo or Schwarzenegger or whoever, and you're like, that's the guy I want to be. But I think on reflection, the reality is no one's that guy. No. And so, the reaction is, in some ways, if you feel like you're losing your manhood, the reaction is in some ways intelligible, right? That you would have some sort of a reaction and make a response to that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think the problem is that the response is something like manosphere and not discipleship.
Yes.
Like, that's where I sort of lose it. I'm like, why are we not recalibrating to discipleship? Why are we recalibrating to any sort of gendered cultural understanding of what, machismo is?
Yeah. And I mean, I have a son. He turns 23 this year. And I'm grateful that he has a really good head. And also has grown up with me and my husband, which is, I think, has helped him maybe with some of this stuff out there. But, these gender constructs are damaging to our young men. And, I think about when they are told, you think about Mark Driscoll. I mean, you think about the things that he used to yell at these men, where he said, if you aren't making enough money, where your wife doesn't have to work, you aren't a man. And I'm like, what is that? We have never, this concept that one partner in the home doesn't have to work for the economy of the home. That is a 19th century invention. It never existed. And it mostly doesn't exist throughout the rest of the world. Right. And yet we are burdening these young men with this idea that they have to walk into jobs that carry, actually more than 6-figure salaries now, that can provide, their wives to not have to work, yet provide all of the medical for, they're supposed to have tons of kids and they have to provide for all of that and it's like, no wonder they're all so stressed out. And not only that, but then they also have to look a certain way, and, the pressure on them to take steroids, to take things to build up, the image, the physical image for men is just as dangerous as the one for women. And Christians are doing this to our kids.
Yeah.
And it's so sad.
It was interesting. I mean, my wife and I, so she was a pharmacist by training.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, she was always going to outpace my salary. Like there was no, no shot. But I remember in seminary, one of my professors saying in class, trying to be pastoral, sort of saying, your wives should never make more money than you do. It creates a power differential in the home. And it struck me so funny even then. I was like, hey, you're telling me I'm going to make nothing.
Yes.
And so my wife could work part-time and still outpace my salary.
Right.
So you're telling me that on one, and then you're citing power differentials, which we're kind of supposed to be against. Right? Like why is this the one place power differentials can be activated in a positive space? Very strange.
Yeah. And it's like, if we are, the idea when you get married is that you become one together, which means you are this equal partnership. That's what we see in the garden in the beginning. Then the money you earn is for your family, whoever earns it. This is just such a weird thing. And I mean, some of it comes from, we think about Bill Gothard. I mean, this is what he taught. He taught that if women are able to make their own money, they will use it on things that aren't good for the household. Like they'll use it on pretty clothes for themselves. I mean, he actually said that. I mean, it's this terrible, demeaning thing. But when we look statistically, when women actually tend to spend their money on the good of the household and the good of the family and the good of childcare and, and education. And it's just, So
it's been, I would say my wife and I have gone through I don't think we've suffered or, it's not been anything big, but we definitely had friction as we've gone through, because there was a time when I stayed home with my son when he was first born and my wife went to work and people just thought that was crazy.
Yes.
And the nicest words we heard for it were crazy.
Yeah.
And so we've had that sort of our whole marriage. And I think it does create this sort of set of expectations where it oddly reinforces a paradigm that isn't true, but that you're seeing play out now in some of these complementarian sort of conversations. And certainly what the SBC is doing, it's become a norm.
Yes.
And now, where it used to be that you could be a deviant and sort of break the norm without severe repercussions, what it seems like is happening is there's going to be now disciplinary measures that if you're breaking the norm, you're going to have harsher consequences for doing so.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, one of the fun, I mean, it's not funny, but it sort of is funny, is seeing people like, for example, the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, who claims to be this really moderate complementarian space where they believe in the equality of men and women, but we just have different roles. And they have been trying to separate themselves from what they call biblical patriarchy, which is Doug Wilson and, sort of that more extreme version. And it's been because, they're saying, no, that's not what we believe. We believe that women and men are fundamentally equal. Of course, women should have the right to vote. We would never argue for that. And it's a little, I look at that and I'm like, but this is where your theology leads. This is the whole thing, is that if you argue this, you are arguing that women aren't equal to men. And this is where it goes, is to biblical patriarchy and Doug Wilson. So at least it's somewhat encouraging to me, maybe, that we see some of these, what I would have considered to be more hardline complementarians, now seeing themselves as more moderate and being like, whoa, we don't want to go that far. I'm like, well, that's positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing a parallel in some ways. So, when we talk about racial conversations,
yes,
what starts to emerge is sort of this false fabric of self-sufficiency.
Yes.
And I call it false because the negative image is always required, right? The idea of maturity always requires that image of what's not mature.
Yes.
So you can always point out to it.
Absolutely.
Even as there's this carrot dangled of be like this and all of your dreams will come true. Well, that, that bleeds into another conversation on ecology, where that sort of notion of dangling the carrot and self-sufficiency actualized for all doesn't actually work. It's destructive to the earth.
Yeah.
But the parallel to me is that as I'm listening, that seems to be very much what's in play here, right? On one side, we want to have our cake and eat it too, right? We want to be able to say in this conversation, well, of course, women are equal to men. God made them equal, but when in every moment, for every single mention of this dialectic, the male is on top and the female is below.
Yep.
And for every moment, the idea for masculine self-actualizing is self-sufficiency.
Yes.
So that the dirty secret in the room is, well, that self-sufficiency, by the way, doesn't work when we want another generation. Right?
Yeah.
So we got to keep women around. It seems like the same dialectic is in play where the self-sufficiency is masquerading over that negative image that has to be kept there in some kind of subjugation. And no matter how many times one can say, well, no, ontologically equal, like if functionally every single instance is disequilibriumized, right? Or if I can coin a word, then what we're talking about there is an ontological disequilibrium.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's 100%. And, and that's also the thing, what I think with racism in the U.S., and we are really seeing the ugly head of white supremacy from people who have been claiming for years in the church that, of course, I'm not a racist. I have friends who are not the same color as me. That makes me not a racist. We invite them into our church as long as they agree with us and do it our way. And then that means we're not racist, but when you actually come down to it, what you find, it's why it's okay for women as missionaries to teach people who are not white, but when they come home, they can't teach white people. And it's like, that is an ontological framework. You are saying that people whose skin is different from you, that there is something less about them, which is why a lesser gender can teach them. And then what we're seeing happening in the U.S. in our churches right now is that this inequity that has been behind the scenes is now coming out on full display. And unfortunately, people who have been in the water learning this inequity for so long can't see it now that it's coming to the surface, because it's what they've been living in, and they don't see the discrepancy.
Let me ask you a serious question. If something triggered a major market drop in the coming months, would your retirement be ready or exposed? With inflation, market volatility, and ongoing global uncertainty, more families are taking a closer look at whether their retirement plan is truly built to hold up. And many are finding that adding a layer of protection makes a lot of sense. Sanctuary Metals is a Christian-owned company that helps families strengthen their retirement savings with physical gold and silver through a gold IRA. During uncertain times, many people look to precious metals as a way to add stability when other assets may be under pressure. If you'd like to explore whether a gold IRA is a good fit for your situation, Sanctuary Metals makes it easy to get started. Text GUIDE to 94878 to receive your free retirement defense guide, or call 888-958-6579 to speak with one of their knowledgeable team members. Again, text GUIDE to 94878 or call 888-958-6579. Let's be honest. Ever read a passage and wonder what it really means in its original context? True Bible study isn't just casual reading. It's about connecting historical background, cross-references, and themes. If you've ever felt like navigating all that is just too difficult, you need to check out Logos. Logos is a game-changing platform that equips you to explore hard questions with absolute confidence, knowing you're drawing from reliable, well-respected academic resources. Whether you're at your desk or on the go, Logos helps you follow that path of discovery naturally. With their new AI tools, you can ask Logos any biblical question and get trusted answers from a biblical library. To help you dive into the layers of meaning in the Word, Logos is offering my listeners an exclusive free 60-day trial. Just go to logos.com/deep. That's LOGOS.com/deep to claim your free 60-day trial. Let's stop guessing and start going deeper together.
So it seems to some degree the diminished middle could be seen as a culprit here, but I'm not sure what to think about that. I'm thinking about a piece that you wrote in your Substack. I won't mention book or author names unless you want to mention them, but there was a piece you wrote earlier this year.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, someone seemed to want to take that middle ground and say, I'm just looking at the basic biblical facts. And the basic biblical facts don't lend overwhelmingly towards the complementarian sort of positions, despite what complementarians want to say, right? And your reaction to that was that I get the substance of what you're saying, and I can appreciate it on a certain level as someone who can draw people back towards a conversation. But your problem was that this person needs to actually take another step and call out injustices. And I'm with you, by the way, in that voice. Yeah. But I wonder in that if that kind of posture that I share with you means that it prevents there from being sort of a middle ground. So now what you end up with is a tug of war or a polarity battle.
So, that actually, I think the fact that people interpret calling out a problem as being antagonistic is the loss of that middle ground. Middle ground is actually the ability to disagree with people and still be in conversation with each other. And so, where we can, it's almost, it's sort of like the way academia is supposed to be, where we're all scholars here, but you can peer review my thing and say, this is, these are all the mistakes that are with it. And I argue back and be like, no, I think you're right here, but I don't see, and that, and then you're sitting and eating lunch at the next conference together, because this is just what we do. I mean, that's middle ground, is being able to sit next to people and be like, hey, I think you're wrong, but I'm still going to sit next to you. And we can talk about it and see. And so what I actually was attempting to do was, well, first of all, so what I was attempting to do, and this is something that I've actually seen evidence behind the scenes, because I've gotten emails from women who were so put off by his attitude, where he said, this isn't going to affect me at all, because I'm still going to have all the friends I have. And I mean, he explained that, but the way it comes off is really like, this is just an intellectual issue. It doesn't really hurt anyone. And when women were like, oh my gosh. And, and so I've had women, in fact, one just wrote me a couple of days ago and was like, I picked up his book because of what you said. And, and so I'm really glad. And I think this will be a helpful book to give to especially the men in my family to maybe help. But it's this idea of like, how do we bring people together and say we can disagree on this, and still, and that, disagreement is the tension that we can live with. And so that, but we don't see it that way anymore. In fact, when I posted that review, the first thing that happened was somebody sent me I haven't been on Twitter for years, but somebody sent me a tweet from Colin Smothers, who I think is still the president of the CBMW, the Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. And he was like, not good enough, Beth Allison Barr, let the fight begin. And I was like, you didn't even read it. I'm actually not trying to fight. This is good. Let's keep this conversation going. But it's this idea that if you are against me in any way, you are my enemy, and we can't cooperate together.
It's the lack of capacity to disagree. I
right.
really, I think you're right. And I think that hits it right on the head, that there is legitimate debate, right, on some of the passages even that you and James brought up.
Yeah.
That we're not sure what's going on here.
Right.
But let's not pretend that whatever's going on in these passages is therefore the entirety of the conversation. And maybe even more importantly, let's not forechange or exclude against the possibility of disagreement and real conversation.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the way that you put that's the true middle, not some desire to please both sides.
That's exactly right. And so that was that may be my most read Substack this year.
Oh, really?
And it's been really, the responses have been very interesting. But I think I started a good conversation. I think maybe the author is not happy with me.
Oh, I'm sure. But conversation is good.
But it's hard. I've been there where you have a best-selling book and everybody's coming at you. I'm like, it's hard. It's a hard space. So it's okay.
Let me ask a question, because I think it's interesting. When we've talked about this whole conversation, we have talked about, to a large degree, institutions and their spokespeople.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked about the SBC and now Mohler. We've talked about, the Council of Biblical Manhood and Womanhood and their leadership. We've talked about, more popular evangelical voices who had big platforms back in the day. James Dobson had the radio program. Like he was the face of something. He felt like an institution.
Yes.
Part of my concern, and this is just sort of my systems thinking background, I think coming out, it's like, I'm concerned that the middle ground doesn't have sufficient coordination.
Yes.
Right. To like come together and go, no, we're not going to do this whole polarization thing. We're actually going to emphasize conversation. We're actually going to, we don't have to agree on everything, but we are not going to tolerate closure of these conversations.
Right.
Inappropriate closure of these conversations, immature closure of these we're not going to tolerate it. And there isn't an institution, it feels like, that does that anymore.
Yeah.
I know universities, some better ones, do that, right? But they're also fairly cloistered as they do it. They're not out there sort of promoting this kind of thing. Do you also see that as an issue here? And if so, have you thought through any ways we could potentially solve it? And just to sort of close out my thought, like, I mentioned before we started recording, I'm like, you've been on a lot of podcasts. Like, we do podcasts twice a week. There's all these other people who do podcasts similar to this all over the place, but they're very like laser focused, targeted. There's not like a network of people who are sort of bound together. We're all sort of doing our thing independently. And so that's not a bad thing, but it's also not the same thing as what the SBC can pull off. It's not the same thing as what these other like coordinated entities can actually pull off.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. If you think about like how did the SBC connect with some of these other more conservative voices? I mean, honestly, let's think about Desiring God. Let's think about John Piper's website and all of the different voices that contribute to that. Let's think about the Gospel Coalition, which controls who gets to contribute. And I mean, I remember, one of their book editors got fired over putting out a positive review of The Making of Biblical Womanhood. And I mean, I felt terrible about that. It was, I didn't know it until after the fact. And, I was just like, why in the world can you not have dialogue over this? You all have to anyway. And so, I think you are absolutely right. There is, I think part of it is that the middle, we don't have the funding resources behind us. Like, if you think about, and so trying to pull these together in a coordinated way. I think also there is a problem. I hate to use the words left or right. I think but there are people on the other end of the spectrum who are, in some ways, perpetuate some of the things that the more conservative end do. Like if you even, like I had some people on the far progressive side who, when I even talked with that book we were just talking about, and I mean, it's Preston Sprinkle, which I recommend. Yeah. He does a lot of great things. He does. Yeah. Anyway, I don't always agree with him, but anyway, so because I even talked about his book, there were people on the progressive side who were like not even willing, who were so angry at me. And I'm like, we've got to be able to talk to each other, and we've got to be able to engage with ideas, but there is not coordinated funding. There's not a coordinate. I don't know how, there's not a network. There is not a desiring God. There is not a gospel coalition.
Yeah.
For that middle.
It feels like, I mean, evangelical theological society is such a huge mix, and it tends to skew a little more conservative. Even some of those scholarly sort of places you go, they just don't really have the oomph behind them. And so the big influential organizations you can think of are going to reemphasize these same kind of points that we've been talking about this entire time. They're going to say, more complementarian. They're going to skew more toward, no women in leadership. They're going to skew more toward, to Ashish's point, they're going to skew more toward a North American white context than anything else. And so you sit back and you're like, the air that we're breathing, the point about these are the things that we've been taught over time, it feels like there's such an inertia behind them that, we've got to really dig in, to change the direction.
Where I've seen encouragement is actually globally. So like I've been involved in the UK. There is a Theos, which is a network for theologians and sort of broad sweep of religion, kind of broad. And they're doing a lot of sort of think work and trying to pull coalitions together. I did a big online event. They have a conference for women in ministry throughout the world that they're hosting in Cairo, called Women Rising. Cool. And so they're, also with the Baptist World Alliance, the BWA, people always, I always tell them that those are the Baptists that I like, the BWA. I love the BWA Baptists. And that's anyway, so I see some of this work being done globally.
Yeah.
I haven't, there are spaces in North America where we see different organizations trying to do it, but it's just really hard in the polarized context that we have right now. It is just really hard to create a middle ground.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe that's just the nature of a middle ground, that those who are trying to create space are just always going to be on the side of having to struggle, and maybe that's okay, but the goal maybe the lesson is don't give up the struggle?
That I think that's always the Christian lesson. Don't give up the struggle, because and that it's going to be suffering. I just finished a study on Revelation in my Sunday school class, and and Jesus wins by losing, and Christians are called. That's carrying our cross, is following a Savior who died and gave it all up for the people who he considered worth it. And so, I mean, I don't think it is easy. I don't think we're called for it to be easy. I think when it becomes easy and when we become successful, we end up on those polarized, it's much more easy. It's much easier to end up in those polarized sides, I think. It's harder to stay in the middle.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, because even if you're on the polarized side and you win, just historically, it doesn't last.
Go well. That's right.
Right. I mean, it's like
it creates another sort of uprising.
Yeah. Right. And really where the tension is what you want to keep, and that dialogue. Yeah. And the more I'm learning about modern U.S. history, there are moments in U.S. history where we've gotten close to that. And that's actually, it's like, okay, I mean, I don't believe utopia is ever going to exist because of sin, but I do think that doesn't mean we don't keep striving for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're about out of time for the episode, so I want to give you kind of a shot at a last comment. And I'm interested in just hearing a little bit about, again, I made the mistake of getting on social media, which I'm not a big social media guy, but just trying to find, some information on the SBC stuff that was going on. And so I hopped on and I'm looking at these, as somebody who's trained in biblical interpretation, you sit back and you look at some of the reels that go by on Instagram and you go, well, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And you sort of sit back and you're like, people who aren't trained in this, who really don't have the ability to sort of sit back and think, well, the Greek there isn't exactly what this is saying, or this is, this isn't connected to that. How would you suggest someone really start thinking through this issue?
Yeah.
Without going out and, going to the SBC website and reading their side and going, because I don't know that helps, but just thought process on how you'd help someone who's just, I'd really like to understand the contours of this issue. How should I approach it?
So I think Jesus gave us a real, when we think about the fruit that we bear, and is this bearing the fruit of the Spirit, love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control? Is it following the commandment? What did Jesus say was the first and greatest commandment? Is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Is what's going on here loving our neighbor? Is what's going on here showing the fruits of the Spirit? Paul says that we're just clanging cymbals if we're not showing the fruits of the Spirit. And so I think that's a real, just sit back and be like, are these policies that the people who my church is putting forward, are they actually bearing the fruits of the Spirit? Are they loving our neighbor? I saw one just the other day where it was sort of, satiring and Jesus saying, people who were, before he healed someone, saying, do you have health care? And should you? And it's like, no, Jesus cared for his neighbor. He healed them and asked the questions. It didn't actually ever ask the questions, but, what is it? So I think that might be one, is this a Christian response? Are they bearing the fruits of the Spirit? And that can help us.
Yeah. Very good. Ashish, any last questions?
More of an amen to that. I appreciate ending with the fruit of the Spirit. That whatever we want to call them, whether we call them the ethics or the virtues or whatever, that they really are there to show you the nature of the tree, right? And so that's a good place to direct us, I think.
Yeah. Well, very good. Beth, it's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Really enjoyed our last conversation on your latest book. And it was, I'm blanking on the title. You forgot the titles. Now I'm forgetting titles.
Oh, Making a Biblical Womanhood, or Becoming the Pastor's Wife?
Becoming the Pastor's Wife.
Yeah, that's my most recent one.
Becoming the Pastor's Wife.
Yeah.
Such an eye-opening idea that how that came about through, these different political changes within the church and all that kind of fun stuff in medieval times. And so it's always fascinating to talk to people who know history, I think, because you just have a different perspective on things than most of us do in our daily lives.
It's fun.
So it's a lot of fun. And give your Substack. It's marginalia.substack.com. Am I getting that right?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. It's the medieval. It's in medieval manuscripts. It's the writing in the margins.
The marginalia.
So what the name, marginalia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll have both of those linked in the show notes. Encourage you to go check out Beth's work here. It's really fantastic, and I think you'll find a great conversation partner in all of it. So, Beth, thanks again for being here. Thanks for the work you do, and we'll see everybody on the next episode of Thinking Christian.
Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Hi, I'm Nicolette Bell, host of the Everyday Prayers podcast. Each weekday, we take just a few minutes to focus our hearts on God's Word through powerful, scripture-based prayers designed for real life right where you are. Whether you're in the car, folding laundry, or taking a rare, quiet moment for yourself, Everyday Prayers is here to help you connect with God and center your day with truth. Follow Everyday Prayers with Million Praying Moms wherever you listen to podcasts.